Well, we're here to talk about Craig Hubler, our general manager and friend of Sunset Sound. Craig feels like he's been here literally forever. And, coming into work now just isn't the same. It's our ambassador of Sunset Sound is not with us anymore, unfortunately. And it's just not the same here. But we do strive to move on. So some of you might not know how Craig came to Sunset Sound. Fast forward back, 1983, my father was still alive and he was actively involved in Sunset Sound. And at the time we had a manager that just wasn't working out that well. And my father came to me and said, I've got this resume from this person in the Midwest, and they're working in I think it was a post-production facility, doing commercials, things like that. And he goes, this guy sounds really good. I think we should fly him out here and have a talk with him about becoming our manager. And I said, okay, Dad, whatever obviously you feel he's qualified, and let's do it. So we flew him out. And I remember he showed up. I think he was wearing a coat and tie, which, for us, it's like, really? But he was a very proper, conservative kind of Midwest individual. And I remember my dad said, well, let's take him to the Brown Derby. He'll probably like that. And that was still open then. Took him over there for lunch and probably talked to him for a couple hours. Anyway, I had a talk with my father, and he goes, I really like this guy. I think he would be good for us. I think he's a professional. It's a little different for us in the direction for a manager, but he goes, I think this guy will get what needs to be done here at Sunset Sound. So lo and behold, we hired him and moved him out here, and that was back in '83. So he was part of Sunset Sound and pretty much the ambassador of Sunset Sound for 36 years. And he interacted with every single person that came through the doors here. Unlike me. I don't, certainly I meet clients, but I don't meet every client. But he always was here, and he did. And he always made sure that the sessions ran very, very well. And he was a great asset to us, and he's going to be sorely missed.
He was a great juggler.
He was.
I mean, he had to handle getting a hold of the clients, working out the specifics, knowing who was past clients, how to treat them, what type of monies they would receive and work out. He'd bring them in at a certain time, and then when they come in, he'd show them what they needed to know and fill them in, and he would take care of any rentals or any type of gear that, these guys come in with all sorts of demands. And just to even know what they're even talking about as far as the type of gear they're using, what they're going to do, what they want to, whether they're overdubbing or whether they're doing, basics and they're having the whole group come in and do, from the beginning. All that part of it goes into what he has to figure out and put together before the session even starts. That was the interesting part. And he was really good at that. Most of the time you're on the phone, you're trying to catch one of the clients out there and get a yes or no, a confirmation, and then he'd have to book the thing and get the monies for it with the record companies or whoever. It was quite an amazing feat, and he did it so effortlessly. Of course, he did come in really early, almost every day, and would take care of all these little nuances and all the small things because he was quiet. It was quiet in the studio, and he loved his time then. And then we'd come in and make all sorts of noise, and he would be sitting on the couch telling us what's going on and what we have to look at, And he did that day after day. Was here, from 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. Every day, 5 or 6. Put an amazing amount of hours. Yeah. And he was the heartbeat, so everybody knew what was going on through him. He would take his, the assistants, and he would figure out who hadn't done some sessions and give them the session and make sure that all the guys had a chance to work. These are all little things that sound, when you talk about it, but he did it like you didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah, Craig really took care of our young guys here, our younger people.
Yeah.
We didn't really notice it to a certain degree until I realized that if one of our assistants got a long session for like 3 or 4 weeks, he made sure the other assistants basically got filled in one way or the other. And
cared about his guys.
Basically he cared about his guys a lot. People who got sick or ill. I have a personal story, basically. I had major surgery a few years ago. Actually, I was off work for about 3 months. Friday, I came home. Saturday morning, Craig's up in my house in Castaic, knocking on the door, some flowers. Are you okay, Mick? Everything you need? Craig could be a battle axe sometimes. You could get into it with him, but it was never anything that was harmful or important. He was a great believer in Sunset Sound and the Sunset Sound way. And as such, as Paul said, ambassador is a very good expression to describe this. He had a lot of fascinating different interests in antennas and all kinds of things.
His antennas. My gosh.
Very mercurial man. You'd be amazed what he was interested in. You'd look at him and go, why does this guy from the Midwest has got every antenna in the world? He's got books.
No, I'm talking about serious antennas. Yeah. These large things, and he'd bring it in and show us pictures of it.
He's got a 40-foot one in his backyard. Basically put it up himself. He was fascinated by that.
Totally fascinated.
He was totally interested. I mean,
he knew the frequencies of the channels on the TVs. He would go right down to the smallest increments, and he'd show me all these dots and dashes and things about what this particular television will do, and the newest ones, how the new technologies. He was very much into the video world. Really knew the video world really well.
His tape knowledge was ridiculous. He would tell you down to the microns thickness of the tape on a reel of tape.
He'd pull apart all these things and have this little.
He initially was like took a degree in like a chemical engineering.
He was a scientist in his own right, really.
He was fascinated by that kind of stuff.
But there's a side of him too. I would come in early, and we'd spend at least a half an hour to an hour looking at the trees, trying to figure out the bug that was on the tree, how to keep the tree from dying. He's so obsessed with these trees out in the courtyard, and he'd be, look at this, Wren. Do you see this white bug on the bottom? I think it is, and he'd tell me the name, and we have to get this, and we have to kill it. And he kept them going the whole time. The little gardens he would put together. So, there's all those sides to him, But he could get tough. He had to be tough with this type of business. This type of business, if you're not tough, you get walked on.
It's funny, I would come in, my normal time is 9 o'clock in the morning, so I'd try to be in a little bit earlier than that, but he'd already been at 7, and the runner had been at 8, and they've got the rooms ready. And they'll tell you, there's been a succession of people who've become engineers here, sat with Craig and watched Star Trek and
Star Trek, one of his favorites.
He loved the shows.
That and the Blacklist.
He loved the shows.
He was a great consumer of that.
Who's that? Spade?
James Spader.
He would talk to us about this.
He also had a great love for reasons I can't understand of English TV. He had, at his house, he had tapes of stuff I grew up with. That was his fascination. He had a certain Anglophile, background that was really interesting.
And how meticulous he was with his labeling of all the stuff, all the videos and everything, right down to.
He should have been a librarian.
Really, just amazing.
He was really a sharp guy. Actually, his sister told me a couple stories that I never knew, and he never had shared this with us, but she told me when he was putting applications to college that he got accepted to most of the Ivy League colleges back east, like Yale and Stanford, and several others. And his parents came to him, sat him down, and said, Craig, that's fantastic. You got accepted to these colleges, but we don't really have the funds to send you to these. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to pay for these colleges because you didn't get a scholarship. So I guess at that point, he made the decision to go to Ohio State. Yeah.
What was his major?
A scholarship, or some kind of nuclear engineering or nuclear research.
He was a physicist, scientist.
So he started college as a nuclear engineer. Yeah. And he said after going to a couple classes that he reported back to his parents, he said, this isn't for me. I mean, not that I can't do it, but he just said, I'm not going to be happy doing this. So that's when he switched his major to media.
That was it.
And went into recording video type,
the whole aspects of basically media.
So what we've heard about the room, his office being painted pink, and how did that happen?
Yes, who would do something like that?
Who did that? And
That's
why did
terrible.
that happen?
Lisa, what happened is he went on vacation. Lisa, who's great, but basically a practical joke, said, Nick, I'm going to paint his office pink, and I'm going to put some bordello stuff in there, and we need to get him something for his birthday.
Yeah.
And I said, he likes pigs and stuff. And she said, that's an idea. I said, well, I actually know somebody, because I used to live out in Chatsworth on horse property, who was actually an animal wrangler who basically would rent out animals for movie shoots and something else. So we got Jolly. And Jolly was a big 200-pound bobbly pig.
That was a big pig.
Basically. And what do you do with a 200-pound bobbly pig when he wants to go somewhere? You let it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Jolly was in Babes in the City. Apparently he was in Hustler twice. Don't ask me why. But Craig came in, and there was this big black and white huge thing with one big tusk. And he spent the rest of the day walking it around. And he had a great time with it. It was
And he
there's a
liked
video.
his pink office.
Oh, yeah, the office was...
Of course, just to irritate
Leopard
us.
prints. I mean, the whole blow-up doll. I mean, the whole thing. It was just hilarious.
He wouldn't show it. It got to him, and then he wouldn't show anything. No problem. Everything was good.
Right. He never complained.
Never complained.
No, I was like, oh, that's fine.
That's part
That's
of who
good.
we are. He had a position that he took very seriously, actually, in terms of who he was at Sunset. And it's not Christmas coming around, Christmas party. Basically, we would decorate, but he would arrange everything else. He was the guy that would sit down and write all the gift cards and stuff and make sure everybody got taken care of.
Yeah, that was the other thing too. He would send out messages for everybody's birthday. Anybody's birthday came up, he'd let us all know and make sure that we all wrote something nice or said happy birthday, that sort of thing. He was pretty good as a Santa Claus.
He was.
He'd come all dressed with his hat on, and the whole deal. He was so proud of putting the big monitor up, the video monitor, and getting a log, burning the fireplace. And so we'd have our...
This was a couple of years ago.
We'd have our Christmas parties.
Christmas party in one, and we wanted basically wanted a little atmosphere, so we pulled in one of our big 55-inch monitors, and you went online. We found a Yule log burning. We left it, on loop.
Decorate the whole place up, and he'd come with his hat, and hand out his little presents, and everything
it's 75
else.
degrees outside, but nobody really cared.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I still sort of expect to see him
good.
once in a while.
And you see a blacklist advertisement coming up, the new series.
I always think of him.
And
I was convinced they were going to cancel it if they told me he passed away.
You would have found out. Sure.
Yeah, James Spader would just resign.
Biggest fan in the world. And the sad thing is that he really wanted to see the next season.
Yeah, it just was
he kept bringing it up and talking about it. And I'm like,
Yeah, he was so excited.
That was his thing, basically.
I think the family vibe here really came through because of how he was, and how he just always treated us.
He made an impact on you.
Yeah, he just made an impact on everybody, and he had a commitment to our lives beyond what a normal boss is. So he was always looking out for us in every way, and was really tough on us, but only in the ways that we needed to be treated that way to prepare us for what was to come. So yeah, he was just the sweetest guy, but also the toughest guy, and just in the perfect way, kind of communicated the way we have to be in this business. So very honest with us, very frank, but only barked when he needed to. Most of the time it was very, very friendly and sweet around here. There was only, a few times for each of us where we really heard it from him, but we needed that,
Do you feel like he's helped shape your career in some way?
Oh yeah, all of us. The whole thing, the way the studios had continued excellence in the staff and kind of fed a pool of great engineers into this industry is because of his leadership, 100%. So this is actually a funny story.
Tell us the story.
So I moved to LA in January 2013 and walked around the Hollywood area with a map of where the studios were and passed out resumes. And I didn't really have any memorable impact from anybody that I talked to, except for one guy. Kind of seemed like a little standoffish, kind of seemed like, what do you want? What are you doing here? Type of vibe. And, when I went home and I talked about what had happened with my friends, they were just like, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And then a couple days later, I get a call. And then I realized it was from the guy who was being sort of mean to me. And then he called me in for an interview. And then the vibe during the interview was exactly the opposite of that. And I just felt this warm dude. And I thought, this might be the right place for me. Something he told me was just like, when people get really stressed out about the record business, it's like, this isn't surgery. We're in this to have fun. Whatever happens, it's not life or death. So just sort of embrace that and enjoy what you're doing. No, none of us got in this business to have, stressful lives. We wanted to enjoy our lives. So I took that with me. I remember that a lot. Craig was such a fan of Sunset, and he had such pride that of the studio's success and of the clients and of the staff. And I just think that should be stated, that he was such a big fan of this place and just loved this place with all of himself and all of his heart.
I've been coming here to work at the studio since late 80s, early 90s. Really, for the last 12 years, I haven't left the facility other than going out of town for projects. This has been my home base for the last 12 years. Craig was part of that. And I will miss the morning routines. I usually show up at studio about 10:30, and Craig is there, and he's got some news. He's been watching CNN or whatever, and he's got some financial news to tell me, or some tech news, or got some stock prices to talk about, always with a cigarette in hand, needless to say. And I will miss that little morning routine before I walked into Studio One. It was definitely welcoming. The other thing is that Craig became such a part of everybody's life here that you almost went to him in a fatherly way for advice, whether it was like, hey, Craig, I got to ship a package to Mongolia. How do I do that? He was the guy that knew everything and certainly knew every little nut and bolt and fixture here. He really is part of the DNA of this studio, and everybody always asks about him and his smoking and his mannerisms. He was sort of a character out of another time, almost something out of Mad Men era character, and everybody always enjoyed him. I mean, artists would always ask about him, like, who is that guy? Is he the owner? Is he the, everybody was curious about him just because he was such a sweet character and always friendly and never intimidated by any artist that came in here, and never, always made them feel super comfortable, and was always nice of, oh, they're in studio too, and let me take you in here, and always so sweet like that. So yeah, he's definitely really, really missed. But for the most part, I miss my, I would always park my car, and even if I go back into my private room in the back, if I wasn't going into Studio One, I would always make it a point to check in with Craig and see how he's doing and see what the day was bringing. So that's going to be missed for sure.
I think the first time I ever met Craig, I was completely intimidated because he was the manager of the studio that I had spent my whole life looking at the back of records. So I was probably like nonchalant, but absolutely terrified. I have to be honest, when I heard he died, one of the things that raced through my mind was just like, there was a series of like at least 3 massive books that could have been written in Craig's mind. I mean, when we did a few things that we did when we talked to him on camera, just like little tidbits when we were in this room, and he's like, oh yeah, well, Prince had his bed over here, and he was pointing where the bed was. And then he was like, yeah, and so this is where he used to like, had a microwave and would cook food. I mean, just like, it's just like a little tiny indication. And then he would start talking about like where they would put a mic. I mean, he had such a wealth of knowledge, and it oozed out of him. The thing about Craig is he was refreshingly straightforward and so easy to work with. And I think that's probably, I haven't heard what other people have been saying, but I'm sure that's what everybody feels or said some version of. There was never any, oh my God, I love your hair. I mean, it was Craig. It was like, available on this time, I'll tell you tomorrow. I know now, boom, 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 boom. It was just like, it was so easy to work here because everything was so efficient. I came in here, the only studio I worked in where there was always a full-time tech here. Now there's 2 guys here full time. Everything works. If something breaks down for 1 nanosecond, it was done. It definitely has a family atmosphere here. I'm sure there's been lots of sex, drugs, and rock and roll have happened in the studio over decades. But ultimately, this place has a feeling of it's a very inviting place, and Craig was a big part of that. From the moment you called and he answered the phone, and I know and that there's still people calling to this day. They'll be like, "Oh, hey, is Craig there?" And that might go on for quite a few years. It's because, clients, we can work in a studio for 3 months in 1 year, and they're not working it for 2 years, and then come back and work for a month. That's going to happen. And I think he is synonymous. I mean, as Paul said, he was here 36 years. 36 years. And I think he was in his early 60s. So most of his adult life was here. And I don't remember ever calling over here when he wasn't here. And I called on Saturdays and Sundays and whatever. He was always here. So, yes, Craig is synonymous with Sunset Sound.
First time that I met Craig, he showed up and said that he was there to meet Paul and Tootie. He had a meeting with them, and I didn't know this was happening. And Paul and Tootie showed up soon afterwards. I can't remember if I called to let them know that Craig was there waiting for them. So, and I had no idea what it was about. And I thought, and I had been there a short period of time, and Craig had a resume in his hand. And usually they didn't show up for things, if somebody showed up with a resume. So this was prearranged. And I thought, well, I'm the new guy. Maybe I'm not doing such a good job. And they all went into the office and shut the door. And I was out in the traffic office, and I was going, oh, maybe I'm not cutting it and I'm getting replaced. And then they went out to lunch. And so for a couple of days, I was like, oh boy, what was that all about? But I soon found out that he was being hired to replace the manager that was working here. That was my first introduction to Craig. I thought he was being hired to replace me. Anyway, it's been a long time. I worked at the Sound Factory for 28 years. I think this would have been 38 for him this year. So for 28 years, this is a guy that I talk to several times a day, 5 days a week. And got to know him. He was, I don't think anybody got to know him much in his private life. I mean, he kind of, when he left here, he had his own thing that he did, he never, I don't remember anybody ever being invited to his house or him, socializing too much unless it was an event type of thing that we were all going to. But he was kind of private in that way. But occasionally I would come over here, for meetings or just to get a break from the other studio. And we'd go into his office and just sit and talk about, family and life and friends and things like that. And he was a guy that all the major events in my life was.
He was there.
Divorce from my first wife, moral support.
Yeah.
At my wedding to my second wife. Was the first one with flowers and a card and send gifts when both of my children were born. There's a picture on the door out there that you guys were looking at, and he's holding a baby in the little blue jumper. That's my son at a month old. It's at the Christmas party. So he was there for all of that, and also at the funerals for both of my parents as well. Along with that, it was a long history of not only was he a work colleague, he was a friend that was always there and supportive.
I met Craig basically by kind of harassing him in a way. I know this sounds weird, but I was looking for jobs, obviously, around here, all the studios, and I actually met up with an old friend of Craig's who used to work here, and he introduced me to Craig, and he said, look, Craig might be able to give you a studio tour. It wasn't necessarily an interview. It was more like, meet and sort of like that. And he showed me around, and then I came back repeatedly, maybe every 2 months or so, and I kept trying to reach him. And he was unavailable, as now I know what unavailable means. Basically, don't bother me. And then once he probably was like, this is enough. I got to see this guy and tell him what's up, So he comes in all kind of sweaty and, busy. And he comes up at me and he's like, look, I like you, but we don't have anything available, okay? I'll give you a call when we do. So that was my first encounter with him. Then I got to work here, and he really is. Sometimes he's such has a deep personality. It's very hard to get the whole extent of it unless you meet him and you spend a lot of time with him, which I certainly did. I mean, I've only been working for about a year and a half, but we spent, every single day here. He was here every single day, and I got to know him. He was a very direct person. I appreciated that about him a lot. A very cerebral and direct person. I don't know. It was a mix of that, and then also warmth, at least towards me. I never really had that many. Let's say, fatherly figures in my life, and he definitely filled that. There was one time I got really sick, and I was at home, and he would just call me basically every couple of days, and it just for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we'd be on the phone, and he'd ask me, "Did you take that? Did you take this?" And that's just not something you'd necessarily think about when you think about your boss or, the manager. So he wasn't never that for me, It was a much closer relationship. And I think it was like that for most people here.
My name is Graham Hope, and I met Craig in 2003 when I started working at Sunset Sound as the night desk person. And I worked for him for about 12 or 13 years. As you know, Craig worked at Sunset Sound forever. And I guess as part of that, he suffered through the antiquated plumbing in the men's bathroom for a long time. And somewhere in the mid-2000s, the men's bathroom was renovated, and that meant getting a new toilet in there. And he came in one day super excited to tell me about this dream he had where all the staff from the studio and the clients shoved themselves into the men's bathroom, and he got to do the first flush so everyone could celebrate. And he was so happy to tell me that everyone cheered. And I think that he made us go and actually do that. He also loved to talk about TVs. And I think that most people learned once you've had that conversation with him 5 or 6 times, you didn't bring up TVs or broadcast anymore. And we also bonded over planes. I'm really into planes. And early on when I was a runner, he and I discovered that we shared an interest in aviation. And so for my birthday, he got me a subscription to Aviation Weekly. So for years, you would see Aviation Weekly distributed throughout the studio, which seemed totally out of place. But I thought it was the coolest gesture that my boss, who had been working at Sunset Sound for 30 years, got me a subscription to Aviation Weekly. And he was slow to adopt smartphones, and he eventually got a smartphone. And when he did, without fail, every year on New Year's Day, he'd send me a shot of the B-2 and the fighter planes following it as they flew towards the Rose Parade, just because they flew over his house in Burbank. And and I'll always remember that. As a boss, he was very fair. If you screwed up, he would give you an earful like that, but he'd give you a chance to redeem yourself. And more often than give you an earful, he would give you praise and tell you that you're doing a good job. I specifically remember he gave me a couple promotions, and on both times he pulled me into his office and he'd talk with me about my goals and the next steps and what I needed to do. And I specifically remember one time he said, you're a hard worker. You're going to get what you want out of this business. And to have that come from Craig, it just meant so much. And even to this day, I carry that with me. He often knew when you were ready to take the next step before you did. And once you had built up his trust and faith in you, he'd give you opportunities. And oftentimes that opportunity was a sink or swim kind of situation. You're a runner. Okay, well, here's a session. You're going in, sink or swim, trial by fire. And that's the way he kind of broke you into your next step. Whenever staff members or clients got Grammy nominations, he made a big deal about it. And he made sure that it made it into the press. And he was just extremely thoughtful for other people. He would make sure that your name was mentioned in trade magazines, and which was cool. But what was really cool about it was he would then take snippets and he'd take the time to cut it out and scan it and send it to you so that you could have a scrapbook of everything you've done. And I think that's very thoughtful. And it was just a pleasure to work for Craig. And I learned a lot about how to work in a professional environment. And he was always respectful to everyone, even if he had to come down hard on him. He was a good guy, and I'm going to miss him. And I'm really going to miss those New Year's Day, early morning wake-up texts of the planes flying over. It was a pleasure to know Craig.
I was working in Studio 2 and cleaning up between the day and the night session. Craig comes walking in and says, "Hi, I'm Craig, your new manager. I'd like to get to know everybody and chat with you sometime." I looked at him and said, "I don't know when that'll be." So we just turned around and walked away. Things were going well. Sunset was very busy. A lot of the projects were spilling over into other facilities and coming back. And I had been working at other places because of this. Craig called me into his office to tell me it was time for me to leave Sunset Sound. I said, "Why?" I said, "I bring some of those projects back here. I still wanted to be associated with Sunset." But he said, "Look, this will be the best thing that happens to you. You'll be free to work anywhere." Craig was the best boss I ever had. After I left Sunset, we became best friends, went to audio, video, electronic conventions, and just hung out like friends do. He will be missed by the entire recording community.